There was a time in my life when my apartment was full, shelves lined with books I never opened, drawers stuffed with gadgets I barely touched, walls covered in decorations I didn't even notice anymore. Every corner was occupied, but inside, I felt empty. A quiet kind of heaviness settled in, like I was always carrying something, but I didn't know what. One rainy afternoon, I sat on the floor, surrounded by things I thought I needed. And in that silence, I realized it wasn't space I lacked, it was clarity. That's how my journey into minimalism began. Not with a grand plan, not with a checklist, just a soft longing for more peace, more meaning, and fewer distractions. But what surprised me most wasn't the clean surfaces or empty drawers. It was how deeply minimalism started to change the way I see, think, and live. It touched things I never expected. My sense of beauty, my choices, the way I connect with others. And slowly, it taught me this. When you let go of what's unnecessary, what truly matters begins to shine. In this video, I want to share 5 quiet but profound shifts that minimalism brought into my life. These aren't about organizing tips or decluttering hacks. They're about perspective and how a simpler life can bring more depth, not less. Some of these lessons took me years to see clearly, and perhaps, in hearing them, you might begin to see something in your own life a little differently too. Let's begin. 1. Develop a more refined sense of aesthetics. There was a time when I believed beauty came from more color, more detail, more of everything. I filled my space with objects I thought were beautiful. Bright patterns, ornate decorations, little trinkets from travels, art on every wall. And for a while it felt lively, rich even. But eventually, it all began to blur. My eyes moved quickly from one thing to the next, never settling, never seeing. It became noise. One evening, after I had begun practicing minimalism, I sat alone in my living room. A single candle flickered gently on the table. Next to it, a plain ceramic cup I had found at a small local market. Simple, slightly imperfect, its surface soft to the touch, like river stone. Nothing else in the room drew my eye, and for the first time in a long time, I saw. There was space between things, and in that space, beauty breathed. Minimalism taught me that the more I removed, the more I began to notice. Subtle textures, natural light, the way a shadow falls across a wall in the late afternoon. A refined aesthetic doesn't come from adding. It comes from learning how to discern, to see what belongs and what distracts, what calms and what clutters. Before, I might have walked past a single vase on a wooden shelf without a thought. Now, I stop. I notice the curve, the balance, the silence it holds. It's not empty. It's intentional. This shift didn't happen overnight. It took time and stillness. I had to retrain my senses, to allow myself to be bored long enough to see. But once it began, it felt like a new kind of sight. Clearer, gentler, more honest. I also noticed my choices began to change. When I shopped, I no longer asked, "Do I like this?" I asked, "Will this live well in the space I've created?" Beauty was no longer about excitement. It was about harmony. About whether something whispered rather than shouted. Whether it helped me feel rooted. There's a Japanese word, shibui, that describes something simple, subtle, and unobtrusively beautiful. It doesn't demand your attention. But once you see it, you can't unsee it. That's how my eye began to shift. Not just for design, but in how I looked at people, nature, conversations. I learned to see the poetry and restraint. You might think minimalism strips life of color, but the truth is, it makes room for you to notice the colors that were always there, just hidden behind too much. Now, when someone walks into my home, they sometimes say, "It feels so peaceful here. There's not much to look at." But there's space to breathe, space to rest the eyes, space to feel. And I believe that's the quiet power of a minimalist eye. It doesn't just make things look better. It helps you feel more connected to what's already around you. So maybe it starts with something small. One surface, one corner, one shelf. Clear it. Let it be empty. Let it be quiet. Then place one thing there, something you love. And notice how it changes, not just the space, but you. In the end, minimalism didn't give me a new aesthetic. It gave me a new way of seeing. 2. Say no to freebies and big discounts. There was a time when I couldn't walk past a 50% off sign without stopping. Something about it pulled at me, quietly but insistently. A whisper in the back of my mind said, "You're saving money. You might need this someday." Whether it was a discounted kitchen gadget or a free pen at a conference, I took it, just in case. But with each small yes, I brought home a little more noise. Drawers grew heavier, cabinets filled, and though I had more things, I didn't feel more secure. I felt weighed down. One day, I opened a closet looking for a box of winter clothes and was greeted instead by a pile of things I barely remembered owning. Unopened freebies, bargain items I never used, duplicates of items I already had. And I saw something clearly for the first time. Every object in that closet had once been a choice I made out of fear. Fear of missing out. Fear of not having enough. Fear of wasting an opportunity, even if it wasn't right for me. Minimalism invited me to ask a different question. What if less is not a lack, but a kind of trust? Saying no to free things or steep discounts doesn't come from arrogance or perfectionism. It comes from a place of deep respect for your space, your attention, your energy. Because every item we own asks something of us, even silently. It asks for a place to live, a bit of care, a piece of our awareness. And over time, those small asks add up. I remember a small shift that changed everything. I was at a store, holding a ceramic mug marked down to just a few dollars. It was beautiful in its own way, but I paused, held it in my hands, and asked, would I choose this at full price? Would I miss it if I walked away? The answer was no, so I did walk away. And strangely, I felt lighter than if I had bought it. This practice of saying no gently, even to the things that seem harmless, became a kind of spiritual discipline, a way of clearing not just my home, but my mind, of turning away from the subtle addiction to accumulation, and toward a life that feels aligned. In Zen, there is a saying, "Let go or be dragged." And I began to see how even the smallest objects can drag us when they are not chosen with care. A drawer full of free things is still a drawer you have to open, clean, manage. The price tag might say 0, but the cost is hidden in how much of yourself you give away without knowing. When I started to trust that what I truly need will come to me, I stopped grabbing things just because they were available. I began to enjoy the freedom of empty space, and I found that I actually used and appreciated the few items I had far more. Now, when I pass a clearance rack or a bowl of giveaway trinkets, I smile, not with judgment, but with gratitude. I know I have enough. I know what I need, and I don't need to fill every gap just because something is free. In this way, minimalism didn't just change how I shop, it changed how I value. I learned to honor not only the objects I bring into my life, but the quiet wisdom of restraint. It's a quiet rebellion in a world that tells us more is always better. But sometimes, the deepest peace is found in the empty shelf, the one you chose not to fill. 3. Stop giving people things they don't actually need. When I first started letting go of things, I found comfort in the idea of giving them to someone else. It felt noble, like a second chance for the objects I no longer needed. I boxed up clothes, kitchen tools, old books, and began offering them to friends, family, neighbors. I thought I was being generous, thoughtful even. But one day, I visited a friend's home. She had accepted a few of the things I'd given her months before. As we sat talking, I noticed them tucked into corners of her space, unused, out of place, collecting dust. One item had become a makeshift doorstop. Another sat in the hallway, still in the same box I had delivered it in. And I realized then, I hadn't been giving. I had been offloading. That moment stayed with me. There's a quiet truth we often overlook. Just because something no longer serves us doesn't mean it must serve someone else. Sometimes, the kindest act is not to pass our burden along disguised as a gift, but to allow an object to end its story with us. In Japanese culture, there's a gentle reverence for objects, treating them with care not just while they're useful, but also when we part with them. When I began to embrace minimalism more deeply, I started to ask myself, am I offering this item to someone because they truly need it, or because I don't want to face the discomfort of letting it go? Giving should never feel like an obligation for either side. When we offer something to another person, it should be done with intention and respect for their space and their needs, not simply to ease our own guilt. I started asking first, would this be helpful to you? Would you actually want this? Often the answer was kind, but honest. No, thank you. And that was okay. It helped me see that true generosity is not about clearing our shelves. It's about considering others with clarity and care. There is also a kind of humility in accepting that not everything we once cherished has to live on. Some things have served their purpose. Their time is complete, and releasing them, without needing someone else to justify their worth, can be an act of quiet liberation. Now, when I let go of something, I take a moment. I thank it. I feel its weight one last time, and then, if it's still useful, I look for someone who might truly need it. If not, I let it go gently. Not everything must be passed on. Not everything must be saved. In doing so, I've come to appreciate not just the absence of clutter, but the presence of intentionality in my home, in my relationships, and in my giving. Minimalism taught me that generosity isn't about volume, it's about mindfulness. It's not about how much we give, but how purely we give it. And sometimes the most respectful gift you can offer is nothing at all. A clear space, a clean break, a quiet no. It leaves room for others to choose what they truly need and for us to release what no longer serves, with peace. 4. Realize that happiness lives in everyday life. There was a time when I believed happiness lived in the extraordinary, a dream trip to somewhere far away, a new milestone reached, a celebration marked by bright lights and loud voices. I chased those moments like fireflies, hoping that if I caught enough of them, I would feel full. But they flickered, brief, fleeting, and after each one faded, I found myself back in the quiet moments, the spaces in between, washing dishes, folding clothes, waiting for the kettle to boil. For a long time, I ignored those in-between hours. I thought they were just filler, spaces to endure until the next burst of joy arrived. Minimalism changed that. As I let go of the clutter, not just in my home, but in my schedule, in my mind, I began to notice what I had been too busy to see, a shaft of morning light stretching across the floor, the sound of my breath as I made tea, the soft weight of a blanket pulled over my legs at the end of the day. In these small, ordinary moments, I started to feel something I hadn't expected. Peace. Then, something more quiet, more steady. Contentment. Happiness, I realized, wasn't hiding in the big events. It was right here, woven gently into the rhythm of everyday life. I had just been moving too fast, reaching too far, to feel it. There's a Japanese word, nichiju, which means everyday life. But it's not just a description of routine. It holds the idea that beauty and fulfillment can be found in the mundane, if we are present enough to see it. One morning, I sat by the window with a simple bowl of rice and miso soup. Outside, a few birds were hopping along the fence. The food was warm, the air was crisp, and for a moment, I felt no need to be anywhere else. It was not an Instagram-worthy moment, but it was real, and I felt whole. What I've come to understand is that we don't need more excitement. We need deeper presence. We need fewer distractions, fewer comparisons, fewer cravings for things always just out of reach. Because when you stop chasing after happiness like a prize to be won, it begins to meet you where you are, in the steam rising from your coffee, in the weight of a good book in your hands, in the quiet way someone you love says your name. Minimalism gave me back those moments, not because it forced them to appear, but because it removed the clutter that was hiding them from view. Now, I measure joy not by how high the peak, but how deeply I feel rooted. Not by how much I have, but how fully I notice what is already here. And perhaps that's the true gift of a simpler life. Not that it adds more happiness, but that it reveals the happiness that was always there, waiting in the quiet. 5. Focus on what is truly positive and meaningful. In the quiet that followed my journey into minimalism, something unexpected happened. Without the constant noise of excess, without the pressure to manage, maintain, or organize things I didn't truly need, I found space, not just on my shelves or in my calendar, but in my attention. For the first time in a long while, I had room to notice where my energy was going, and I saw, with gentle clarity, how much of it had been scattered. Little fragments of focus lost to endless scrolling, to tasks that felt urgent but not meaningful, to conversations that drained more than they gave, even to my own thoughts, worries, comparisons, planning too far ahead. My life had been full, but not always full of what mattered. Minimalism invited me to ask a simple question. What do I want to give myself to? It's a quiet kind of question, not one that demands instant answers, but one that lingers. Slowly, it began to shape the way I moved through each day. I stopped trying to do everything, be everywhere, respond to every voice, and instead, I began choosing, gently, intentionally, where to place my time, my focus, my heart. I started with 3 small things that felt like they brought light instead of noise, reading a few pages of a book each morning, taking walks without my phone, calling someone I love, and really listening. They weren't grand or impressive, but they were true. And when you begin living in alignment with what feels true, there's a soft sense of peace that starts to grow, a steadiness. In Japanese Zen, there is the idea of ichigyo zeimai, total concentration on a single act. Whether it's sweeping the floor or writing a letter, you give it your full presence. You do not divide your attention. You give your whole self. Not because the task is extraordinary, but because the act of attention itself is sacred. This, to me, is the heart of focusing on what's meaningful. It's not about cutting out everything else with force. It's about turning toward what lifts you, choosing nourishment over noise, choosing depth over breadth, and trusting that a life centered around what you truly value, however simple it may look, has far more richness than a life filled with distraction. One evening, I sat outside as the sun was setting. I had nothing scheduled, no devices near me, no to-do list to chase. I simply watched the light shift, felt the air cool against my skin, listened to the soft hum of the world settling. It was ordinary, but it felt like coming home. This kind of focus doesn't demand perfection. Some days, I'm still pulled in many directions, but the difference now is that I notice. And in noticing, I return. Minimalism taught me that focus is not about discipline. It's about devotion to what matters, to what makes you feel more alive, to what helps you become more fully yourself. So, I continue to ask each day, what will I give my best attention to today? And I try to let the answer guide the way forward, like a lantern glowing softly in the dark. In the end, it's not how much we do or how much we gather that defines the beauty of our lives. It's how deeply we live in the moments we choose to keep. And so, little by little, minimalism reshaped the way I live. Not just what I own, but how I see, how I choose, how I move through each day. It gave me a more refined sense of beauty, quiet and slow. It taught me to say no, even to the things that come dressed as bargains or blessings. It reminded me not to give what isn't truly needed. It helped me see that joy is not something to chase, but something to feel right here, in the gentle rhythm of everyday life. And it guided my attention toward the few things that carry the most meaning. But more than anything, it gave me space. Space to breathe. Space to return to myself. If you're standing at the edge of this path, wondering where to begin, let it be small. A single drawer, a single corner, a single moment. Clear it. Sit with it. Let it be empty without rushing to fill it. And see what starts to surface, not just in your home, but in your heart. Minimalism is not a finish line. It's not a contest. It's a quiet unfolding, a way of remembering what matters. Thank you for sitting with me through these thoughts, these stories. If they stirred something in you, I invite you to carry that stillness into your own life, just a little bit at a time. And if you'd like to keep exploring this path together, I'd be honored to have you here. Until then, take care, and keep making space for what matters.